Elon Musk was born in the summer of 1971 in South Africa. From a young age, he was bullied pretty relentlessly. There's a lot of rumors that Elon came from a rich dad who owned emerald mines in South Africa, and that he was set up to be successful because of family wealth. This isn't factually computers and programming.
I taught myself how to program computers, mostly because I wanted to program games.
At the age of 12, he invented a video changing the world for the better. And what you think about him probably comes from what you read about him. And what you read about him was probably served to you by an algorithm. This is how our media landscape works these days. It felt absurd. On the flight home, Elon makes this list of every component he can think of needed to build a rocket. And then he put in the estimated price for just the materials and the components. What he found is that the prices that they were quoting him for these rocket parts were highly inflated. He interrogated every single cost associated with rockets and started to make plans on how his team could find a much cheaper way to build them. He did this over and over and over until by the early 2020s. His 4 big companies had grown rapidly to become worth billions, Tesla reaching $1 trillion valuation, one of the most valuable companies on Earth, revolutionizing the car industry. And by January 2021, these successes has skyrocketed Musk to become the world's richest man, according to Forbes Billionaire Tracker. But don't be fooled. At the end of 2022, he buys Twitter for $44 billion. In his offer letter, he tells us why he's doing it. He believes that Twitter has the potential to be the platform for free speech around the globe, and that free speech is a societal imperative for a functioning democracy. And right away, Musk applies his playbook to the company, sending out a midnight email telling the thousands of employees that there's going to be a new Twitter culture that is, quote, extremely hardcore, long hours, high intensity, and tells anyone who wants to stay to fill out this form or be fired.
Thousands of Twitter employees are
tweet where he says, "This is a battle for the future of civilization. If free speech is lost, even in America, tyranny is all that lies ahead." So that's number one on what he says his motives are.
I think part of it is that it's where it was located, which is downtown San Francisco.
The next pillar of Musk's reasoning has to do with the city of San Francisco.
Is there a place that's more far left?
It's like the story went from quirky visionary engineer uses his brilliant, unorthodox, socially immature tactics and obsessions to accomplish unprecedented engineering feats, to said quirky engineer suddenly dedicates his brilliant mind away from physics and towards social media, because he believes that there's a deep state conspiracy between San Francisco technologists infected with liberal bias and their censoring government overlords, and he is going to fix it. What happened? Let's see what happens next. So, after firing most of the employees around the Super Bowl, and he notices that this tweet gets less engagement than the tweet by President Joe Biden, Elon does not like this. He calls an urgent meeting and tasks 80 engineers to quickly rebuild a version of the algorithm that will allow his tweets to be artificially boosted by a factor of 1,000. I was kind of skeptical on how sensational it was reported, or what they said. What's puzzling to me is that this isn't free speech absolutism. It's not say anything you feel like free speech to me. Musk then decides that the word cisgender is a slur on Twitter and threatens to ban people who use it too much. Is that free speech? He then starts banning journalists who criticize him, though he did reinstate a few of them after a vote, and then starts suing media watchdog organizations like the Center for Countering Digital Hate, trying to silence them for criticizing the new Twitter. Musk, of course, lost, with the verdict coming out saying that this lawsuit was basically about trying to silence criticism and deter others from criticizing his company.
He's someone who is willing to use his enormous wealth and power to...
What about this argument that Twitter is infected with liberal ideology because it is based in San Francisco? Of politics on Twitter. It's a study from before Elon took over. They conducted a long-running, massive-scale randomized experiment where they looked at a huge number of tweets from 7 countries And they found that in 6 out of the 7 countries, including the United States, that, quote, the mainstream political right enjoys a higher algorithmic amplification than the mainstream political left. They saw this over and over. Oh, and also a really interesting side note here is that they found that Twitter actually doesn't amplify far left or far right political groups more than moderate ones, which is a myth that I believed until I read this study. But the whole point is that old Twitter did not have a liberal bias. If anything, actually true. Upon taking over Twitter, Musk cracked into all of the internal communications and found a bunch of emails that showed how Twitter had banned and suppressed information that it deemed harmful and dangerous, but that they did so sometimes with a political bias. You can see things like Biden's team asking Twitter to review these tweets that they didn't like. Yes, governments around the world.
High-profile journalists have been silenced.
Here are the number of takedown requests that governments around the world made to Twitter in the 6 months before Musk took over. And these are the ones that Twitter complied with. Twitter would fully comply with the government's censorship request about half of the time. The other half of the time, they'd say no. In the 6 months after Musk, the number of requests went up, probably because Musk got rid of a lot of the automatic moderation. But look, Musk's Twitter now says yes to government censorship over 80% of the time, way more than the old Twitter. Wait, what? And the accounts, and then said, we didn't have a choice. They were going to shut down all of Twitter, so we had to do it. And then they patted themselves on the back about how they were still trying to fight it. And they're doing so much for battling government censorship and transparency on the platform. But guess what? They did have a choice. This same kind of thing happened before Musk ever came in, and Twitter fought back. In a previous Turkish election, the government tried to do the same thing, censor posts about corruption within the Turkish government. They asked Twitter to take these down, and Twitter said no. They fired back that political speech is among the most important speech, especially when it concerns matters of possible corruption. So, Turkey shut down Twitter. It was down for a couple of weeks while they battled it out in court, and the Turkish government lost. Indeed, they lost because they were trying to censor political speech and his hate for government censorship. Twitter used to have a page where they would publish in detail why they would take down any content they took down at the request of the government. And there's this research lab at Harvard that would aggregate all of this for the public. When our story producer Alex went to go look for these government requests from Turkey and India, she found that they no